Hello and welcome to The Last Fireflies. In today's episode, we will try something new. We will try to discuss us three, me, Robbie, and Em, about the climate emergency. Should we use urgency as an accent in our narratives? When I came up with this idea and I proposed it to my friends to discuss it in the podcast and just make a discussion type of episode where we don't have a guest to tell us something about their research, or we don't have so much content on like what is climate and how it's functioning and so on, but more like our opinions. I've seen myself in the last year or so feeling something about this concept of urgency, something that is really used in the climate narratives. And I was trying to hold my ideas and thoughts and emotions around this concept. So in this episode, we would like to just approach this subject and see where it goes. Over the years, I've heard so many takes on how climate activism and more specific climate communication should or shouldn't use urgency as its tactics, or if it's using it to counterbalance it with something else. And many times the conversation also stops abruptly when one of the parts starts labeling it as a liberal or authoritarian, depending on which side the speaker thinks the other person come from. So I would really like to tackle this together and see how we position ourselves regarding the climate urgency. And maybe it's not so much as a positioning, but more like thoughts that come up in this conversation that we try to have now. And I came up with 3-4 aspects of how I saw urgency used. So first one will be urgency used in regard with action, like campaigning, for example, with urgent action is needed, otherwise we face a catastrophic world. And from this angle, I heard two sides of the spectrum. So on one side, it's the people that are saying that it's a totally valid truth fact. It's the reality we live in, so we should just face it, fight it, and rise up to the task as urgently as possible. And on the other side of the spectrum is the people that are saying that this is a numbing message to say that it's everything so urgent and we have to act now and now, and brings saturation and doomness and creates this overwhelming feeling that it's immobilizing. So it works kind of against itself. And of course, these are two opposite sides of the same spectrum. But I would really like to discuss between us, like, how do we position ourselves about this urgency used in regard with action? Do you have any thoughts?
You said something like it's either construed as liberal or authoritarian. And can you expand on what do you mean in what context?
Well, sometimes I hear this approach of saying like, oh, nothing is so much urgent. Like if you question the urgency, you're like a liberal that wants to keep the status quo. Or if you say you want to discuss about the urgency aspect of the climate struggle, some people will say that you're authoritarian because you are asking the ones that are already in power to come up with solutions, urgent solutions, and they believe that we are asking for some authoritarian fast solution at hand. To me, it's more like I really want to discuss about how we use urgency and why do we use it, and is it something about the way we are using urgency indeed problematic? And I'm really up for conversation about that.
Okay, well, obviously you can be a proponent of something while being also critical of what you are proposing, I think, especially because it's such a complex, notion also in the effects that it has, right? It is so complex because it has such complex effects, because the notion of urgency in itself is not that complicated. But what does it lead us to, and what does it make people feel, and what does it make governments do? That's the complicated part.
So I don't have an answer to whether we should use or not urgency. I can maybe just describe the way I have been trying to deal with this issue. In my mind, there are two truths that I know. One of them is that, as you said, Ani, already, but just to repeat in different words, the climate crisis has a real material urgency to it. So it's not just that we want to get it fixed fast, right? It really has a timeline to it, maybe not a hard deadline, but it does have a timeline to it. This is also nuanced by this new information that we have been exploring in the last episodes about tipping points on the one hand, which adds the quality of irreversibility to many of the changes, although many of the effects were already irreversible, right? But tipping points really adds a kind of strong irreversibility to some of these changes induced by global warming. And then we have the other thing, which is this acceleration of the warming, which might have to do with aerosols. This compresses the timelines even more, and it makes the possible future scenarios even worse, depending on what is the explanation for it. So yeah, it really has added some new types of urgency, or like added new nuances to this real material urgency of the problem. So this is one truth that I try to hold. And the other is that indeed, if you are constantly bombarded with the enormity of this task and like the urgency of it, then it can produce anxiety and it can lead to burnout and emotional detachment. This is also true for me. And so I'm trying to figure out how to hold both of these, right? It's pretty difficult. Like on the one hand, I feel like when I'm driving on the bus to work, sometimes I look at someone and like feel like going there and shaking them. Are you aware of tipping points and accelerated warming? Are you aware that this is happening? Because I really think that people don't know this information, right? There is this narrative sometimes that there is no point anymore to list facts because people know the facts, but it doesn't make them care about climate change, right? But now I think that people don't know these facts or this information. So that's on one hand, and on the other hand, as I said, like the weight of all this is a real thing, and it is affecting me also. Like this semester, I taught a course on climate change, and I remember especially the course on tipping points. We talked about tipping points and thresholds and what we are risking to lose. And we talked a bit about corals, for which the tipping point might probably have been activated already. And like the Great Barrier Reef, which is the biggest natural structure on the planet, visible from space, right? I used to listen to it as a kid. Steve Irwin talk about it and whatnot, and I might not get to see it in my lifetime. And I remember after the course, I went for a beer with a colleague, and we kept talking about the same things. And I just felt like this kind of anxiety and like this huge weight on my chest. And I just felt like I cannot do this every day. It's not sustainable. So I think like both of those things are true, and I'm just trying to figure out how to hold them both without dropping one of them. Because the tendency is maybe to, you cannot hold both and then you just focus on one. But I don't know at this point how to do it. I don't have a formula.
Yeah, I think I hear you, and I do agree that it's about holding these somehow opposite truths or notions of, at one hand, to really grieve for what we are losing, and on the other side, also fight for what we still have. But for me, climate communication, it's always filled with emotion. And I don't want to curate the emotions we have. I really think, for example, that anger is mobilizing. And we as society, I think we have to make peace with anger and understand it, the emotion of self-defense, more often than an emotion of aggression. Because sometimes people that are angry at protests, for example, when we point angrily to the same fossil fuel company like Shell or OMV, shouting slogans to stop their business, it is mobilizing and it is necessary. And anger makes sense in that context. And I heard people saying that this is just aggressive or whatever. I'm not on the same page with that. I think anger has its space in this because it's a call to stop the injustice that we see. So anger is mobilizing. But when we plan climate communication, like when we want to ask people to engage, I really wish to hold these emotions more clearly, to learn how to use them in our own interest, if you want. And to explain that, I hear urgency being called out with facts, but the emotion that transcends those technical messages is of desperation more than resilience or hope. Moreover, climate urgency is being called out many times with global facts, And the little you as a listener can do is a very local action. So as a start, I feel that there is not much to be done. Like, if it's global and it's so big and it comes with this desperate, fearful future, then I really feel powerless. I don't feel empowered in any way. And while I do agree there is a lot of desperation when it comes to climate, as also the scientific research shows us, I also really need to articulate and hear more of our capacity to overcome this. So I perceive desperation as a freezing tool, not as a wake-up call. And putting the fight at the global level makes me feel even less empowered. So that's why I'm like, when I hear this, the urgency, and I thought for the first time when I also proposed this conversation, I was like, maybe urgency is a problem. And I realized that it's not urgency the problem, but the way we call for action to the task itself, it freezes me more than actually calls me out. And I don't know, maybe I'm also over anxious or overburdened with the whole climate narratives, but maybe it is something useful in here that maybe we have to articulate more of the overcoming powers we have as communities. And be honest, many times I hear like in the conversations or like talks, public talks of academics and researchers and podcasts and so on, I hear half an hour of doomness and then 5 minutes of, but we will manage. Just put yourself at work, just organize. And that's it. Like, I really need more than that. I need more resilience. And for example, that's why I like in our podcast that we offer also tools of how to, so people can really grasp somehow how to do that or like how to get involved. If we really communicate with people that don't know or don't understand the urgency at stake, we really have to get them where they are at, then bombing them with the catastrophe will come. And also, I feel like it's a lot in it. There is so much fear-led politics. And I don't think fear is our best tool. I think fear is the tool of the states and companies and capitalism. And I think really we have to bring it back to the power we have and the love we have for the nature, for species, for rivers, for what is alive on this planet. It might sound hippie, but I think there is something more powerful into that. And I really want to somehow see what's the path to embody this urgency in this kind of state. I don't know. Does this reflect something in you?
I think it makes a lot of sense what you're saying, and especially what both of you were saying with global urgency putting you in a state of freeze. And I've tried to go through some papers to prepare for this episode, and they do mention this, that the framework of urgency can make people feel like they are actually unable to do anything. And I think it's all about how do we talk about this thing? How do we frame it? And then whenever you want to talk about something to achieve a goal, then you need to, there are not just facts that just flow in the space of truths. The way that you tell their story makes you feel in a certain way. And then there's also the question of audiences. Who are you talking to? Are you talking to fellow activists who are already feeling overwhelmed? Or are you talking to people who need to be shaken up a bit? Or are you talking to institutions? Or are you talking to politicians? All of these questions, if the point of the discourse is to be effective, should make for changes in the discourse. This is the two questions. Of course, in our minds and hearts, it is the climate emergency, but then, what does it mean and who do we talk to it in this way? And trying to reframe it at a smaller level, I think that's a really good step, because then, like you said, we can feel more empowered to do something. And I would really like to see more of this, because when you really see some concrete actions, like, I don't know, some coal mines closing or some concrete energy transitions that went well, then you start to see, oh, well, maybe something can work. Because when you look at the big picture, it's really, really scary, especially with everything that's happening right now. So we're recording this in January 2026, and the year already started with just so much political turmoil, and it's all of it is so heavy. Yeah, maybe I can say just a few words. I read a paper that I really liked. It was from Michael Albert in 2022, and it's on climate emergency and securitization politics. And basically, this is touching upon what Ioannis said with the authoritarian accusations, because he recognizes that it can be a problem with not just saying, oh, well, it's a climate emergency because it is, but actually having states act as it is a climate emergency. And this was actually made pretty apparent when we had the COVID lockdowns, because there were states of emergency declared nationally in many states. And we saw that people were really scared of the power of the state and how much the state could control our movement and everything we did in this state of emergency. Do you remember reading these articles of people saying, but if they will declare climate emergency, it will be just like this, it would be terrible?
Yeah, I do have memories of that. And I also think that we really have to bring it back to the power of the people. I was reading this small book called Words Against the End of the World. And one of the authors, Raquel Gutierrez Aguilar, she was saying, she was mentioning the same with the COVID and the fear and the authoritarian state that comes and like practically brings the science, saying with the science you have to obey because we know what's good for you. And if we lead only with scientific truths of catastrophe that comes and you have to like really fight against it without really bringing it back to the people and the power of the people, we don't do much different than that kind of politics. And for me, like I found my answer, for example, with really bring it back to what is in your community that you can struggle for. There is an excavation or an extraction that is happening. There is a deforestation, a dam construction, monocultures in your village, pesticides used for your food. Those are all valid fights that are in the direction of climate, like climate supportive fights, but maybe they're not so direct. I think that there is a bit of an abstract politics in the climate emergency. We talk about the carbon and the whole planet level, global level of emissions. But if we look in the downscale of what we have at hand, we see a lot of things like the war that is happening. It's like the army has the most emissions per capita. So it's still climate work. We don't frame it in that way, but I think it's still climate work to be, for example, against militarization. And I don't know, like I also read this article of a researcher called Ole Sandberg. And he was showing how in the face of unknown, like the uncertainty that comes with crisis and so on, people tend to stiffen up. So they are looking for authority. They are looking for control. And I think that that's the state we are leading into. We are leading into an ideology of we have to have back control and we stiffen up. And even the non-authoritarians, like anarchists and leftists, are really searching ways to stiffen up instead of opening up and like organize with your people despite the differences, really come together as people that have power if we do it together. But we really have to get more close to the public affairs with collective power. I don't know where I'm going anymore.
I think you're going in a good direction. Partly, this is also what the paper says, that the 2022 paper looks in a big part at the dangers of climate emergency. And it says, there's all these things about how it's unlikely to work because it makes people freeze up and so on. And then there's some critique that it's actually a restrictive framework because why is climate an emergency and not all the other social justice issues that are really terrible and people are also dying? Why are they not an emergency and climate is? But then I think the one that's really big and important is the fact that the climate emergency could go in this authoritarian side, right? And then it would be overriding justice concerns and it could go towards a police state. And then even if this doesn't happen, there's still the question of the so-called green sacrifice zones, places in which we would have extraction to make, I don't know, solar panels or the other thing that's, what is it called? Biofuels, things in this direction. So there are all these problems with it, but then there's the problem without it, right? What happens if we don't call it an emergency? And then how will we make things change? how will we solve the fact that it is happening? And the more we are not doing something, the worse it will get. And then we won't be able to do what we could have done right now, right? So what this person proposes is this idea of the extraordinary politics of the extraordinary, in which you could try to combine these concerns about justice to actually have just emergency mobilizations. And then he said that they could, I quote, accelerate decarbonization while advancing climate justice objectives, including increased democratic participation, a more fair distribution of the benefits and burdens of mitigation nationally and globally, and deeper recognition of and reparations for historic injustices. Though this could only occur in the context of organized grassroots power on a massive scale. So then here it is. Here we have one idea.
I would just like to add to the argument of why is this more important than other struggles. Some quality of being locked in is true also for other struggles. Once you have some laws, for example, put in place or some infrastructure put in place, it's harder to dismantle it. But with climate change, we have this irreversible nature for it and a truly global nature also for it. For like a feminist struggle, if you have some victories in the US, maybe that will spill over to, other parts of the world in a cultural way, right? But it might also not. Or if you have it in one country, some victories. But here, like if the emissions in the US make the world cross the tipping points for melting of the Greenland ice sheet, that influences the whole world. Of course, regional effects are always stronger than the average, but it's truly global in nature. So I think those two qualities add something different to the climate struggle. Which call us to focus in it in a particular way, to center it in a way maybe. Of course, it doesn't make other struggles less important or irrelevant. It's just, I don't know, it does ask to be somehow put in the forefront in some way.
This person, Mike Hulme, his worry is that the climate emergency could narrow political action to be just about carbon emissions. So this is, and then why is it not about the intersecting global challenges? Because anyway, right, we know we cannot solve not even the carbon emissions without solving other political, economic questions, issues that we have.
Yeah, I was thinking of the same aspect. When I said that there are other struggles, like, for example, anti-militarization and so on, which are working in the direction of climate struggle. We just don't call it in that way because we kind of used to catalog climate struggle when it comes to emissions. But I think climate struggle looks in many different ways because of these complex systems that we have. So we know that fossil fuels companies, of course, is one of the biggest emitters of CO2 in the atmosphere and methane and so on. But also the whole army is the same. Also the cow farms and meat farms that are also one of the biggest emitters. So the way that we are doing agriculture and the way we are like treating water, I think that these are also part of it. Maybe it's from environmentalism looks like, but I think it helps in the climate. And if that is closer to us as people, maybe it's a good way to get involved and get engaged than just everybody starts now to fight one company in one part because that's, I don't know, in UK they're against Shell, but me in Romania, maybe I can still, save the water nearby and get involved with stopping the arm production, and that's still climate effective. I feel like this focus of centering all on climate emissions, it puts us closer to what solutions are at stake. And solutions come from capitalism in this case with Nagorno-Karabakh, like forced evacuation, ethnic cleansing, telling that it's an empty land. So is that the solution for climate? I don't think so, because I think the climate will be worsening, even if we do all these solar panels everywhere. So I really want to go back to the system change, not climate change, in a way, like what kind of system do we really want instead? So for me personally, I don't think the urgency is really the problem here. There is an urgency, as you very well said, Robbie, there is something embodied into the fact that we are approaching tipping points. So not the urgency is so much the problem, but the message behind it. The fact that if it's global and it's so desperate already, that doesn't help me to get engaged. So I really want to focus it on it is urgent and you can do something where you are at. You can, like, of course, get knowledge of what it's involving, how climate works, and what industries are more damaging, and so on. But you can still have power where you are at.
I love that. I love that thought.
When I think about climate change, I like to use an image, a metaphor, but I have a bit of a concern. I really hope it's not offensive to anyone who's living with a disability or a chronic illness, because it's never a good idea to make comparison or metaphor out of disability, especially if it's used as a stand-in for something negative. I'm going to do it here, and hopefully it's not in a way that's offensive to someone. I sometimes think of the problem as like living with cancer, because like cancer is a peculiar disease because you have a timeline to it. Like the more you wait, the less likely it is that you can have a treatment that succeeds in curing it. And there are different aspects. First of all, the really only effective cure or possible cure that we know is like radiotherapy and chemotherapy, which are both very, radical solutions. They are poison and they poison also the body. So it's an example where a really truly radical solution is the only possible solution. Even that solution is not 100% guaranteed to work, right? And then there are people who want to avoid thinking about it because it's something very bad and they just put it out of their minds and wait. But the more you wait, it makes it worse, right? So it's this kind of, if you have a friend who doesn't want to do chemotherapy or something, how do you tell them, okay, you don't have to live with anxiety, but at the same time, this is like an issue with a time frame, and it's important to act as fast as possible. But there's also the aspect of learning to live with pain and the body that is no longer, able-bodied, and that's a whole different issue in the parallel with climate change. That is like talking about how to live with climate change and with perturbed ecologies or destroyed ecologies, and how not putting the tag that some ecosystem that has been destroyed and abandoning it, but learning how to live with that loss and with illness and disability. And I think it has some value for climate change. And this is kind of how I think about the problem.
I don't feel really comfortable with the cancer analogy, but I understand it from the point of view of timeline. But again, for me, I think it is more than this. I think we are so focused on the fact that there is a timeline and we are putting all the narrative into the timeline, but the narrative is a desperate situation. I want to put into the narrative the capacity to tend to the wounds, the capacity to prevent other wounds, the capacity to restore some places that are destroyed by the capitalism, everyday ways of production. For me, militating with the timeline only doesn't help, because I need something more to it in order to be drawn into that fight. And I heard many other metaphors. For example, there is also this climate emergency described in terms of war language, like there are the enemies and we have to fight them. It's they versus us. The elite is killing us and we are at war with the elite that are like killing the planet that we are living on. I do understand the need of metaphors to really show the level of catastrophe that we are maybe going towards, but maybe we can also go towards a beautiful world that we can shape by engaging and by resisting and by making blockades for those people that want otherwise. Like, I really feel the narrative is, for me, very important to shift it towards something that is more full of life than death. Even when you live with cancer, for example, or someone that has cancer, you are fighting that disease with the need or with the idea that you go beyond it. I don't think that someone really fights cancer thinking every day that they will die of cancer. They are fighting it by believing that they can overcome. And that's what I need also from the climate, to really believe that we can overcome it, and like really looking into the ways we can do this together, than actually just pointing out how bad things are. Without saying that we don't have to understand how bad things are. It's just more, I need something extra than the desperation. Especially when we want to make education and when we want to bring people together. if we address people that yet don't understand the level of danger we are in, even more, like it's kind of like, if you want a metaphor, I have this one. It's kind of like putting in someone's hands a bomb and says, okay, good luck, take care of it. You can turn it off now. But they don't know the ways to turn off a bomb, and they just sit with it in their hands. That's how I hear climate emergency many times, of like, it's ticking and I don't know what to do with it. And I think there are ways to look at the danger and look through it. You have to really look beyond it, beyond capitalism, beyond this steep hole we are going towards. If we don't imagine what else, then it's hard to believe that we will do it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you. And I think maybe this bomb metaphor is better than what I said. To me, it's not like you have the bomb in your hand, but it's like the bomb is in the building where you work. And you see this information that there is a bomb, and normally you would run out of the building, right? Or whatever you would do, you would not just continue doing what you're doing, sitting at your desk, typing your code, debugging, whatever. The reason why I feel like this, need to lead with the urgency is because I see people not running out of the building. And I think here the bomb metaphor is good, because it's not like unless you have already formed the vision of what the world would look like if the building exploded and you would have to live off the forest or whatever, right? It's not like you will run out of the building only if you have that vision told to you by someone or a community which you can readily join. And it's also, you cannot say that I'm avoiding thinking about the bomb because it produces me anxiety because I don't know if it will be diffused or I don't know how to diffuse it. It is an emergency. You run out of the building and then you have 3 people who are working on a solution to defuse the bomb, or you have another group of people in the park figuring out how to make bread from acorn flour or whatever. It's not like you have no idea what to do. There are different groups of people who are saying what could be done, and most people are just not running out of the building. Even, I would say, people from leftist activist circles are not running out of the building. I remember a quote from a comrade who was saying that, yeah, the climate issue is important, but I think there are enough people working on it, so that's why they don't feel like getting involved. And that's what I'm saying to everyone. It's a bomb that will explode, and the majority of the world is not working on a real solution to defuse the bomb within the timer of the bomb. So let's run out of the building and also make bread from corn flour or work on MacGyver, whatever, duct tape solution to defuse a bomb. But let's run out of the building. We cannot just continue living our lives like it's not there.
I think metaphors are necessarily imperfect. This is why we use them to grasp just one part of the meaning of what we're saying, a part that we want to emphasize. So I think this is a good exercise to try to find new, more empowering metaphors for the climate crisis, for the climate emergency, all the challenges that we are facing. I'm trying to find something that's more empowering. I'm thinking something like, what if we think of it as, I don't know, like a big tree that's starting to fall. And if we don't all get together to catch it and put it back, it will fall on us. But then if we do get together and we can put it back, then we can restore its ecology or something like that.
Maybe we can make a round of with what we stay after this conversation. And for me, I think I stay with this idea of like we really have to hold different opposing realities. One, that it is difficult and catastrophic and it's hard, and we have to tend to this desperation and grief to the losses that are already happening. And in the same time, really tending to the hope that we can overcome and find ways to get together as collectives, as groups, to fight for the climate where we are at.
Okay, so I'm definitely staying with the thought to try to look for better metaphors, better in the sense of more empowering frameworks to talk about this crisis. And also with the lead, that more empowering frameworks can be maybe sometimes a bit more specific or more local or smaller. And that's not a bad thing to, make it a bit smaller and to point towards something that people can do. Because anyway, a person is just a person. A person who listens to this podcast is just they're just themselves. They cannot do everything. So if more people do the things that they can do, this is how I think things will get done.
For me, I think what I would like to end on is I recently read this book called Human Nature 9 Ways to Feel About the Changing Climate by Kate Marvel. It's a nice book. I thought it was going to be a bit more focused on the climate movement and explore these. The chapters are structured, each one has an emotion, and they're structured like this. But it's actually more biographical information about her, which was actually, I liked that part, and how the author became a climate scientist and how she grappled with all of these emotions while also doing research and while also like the world not really listening. And the last chapter I think was about hope or love. She said something which stuck with me a little bit. It was a discussion about having children, and I'm not necessarily sure if I want children or not, but it was a nice thing that she said, like, some people say that not having children is something good for the climate, but in a way having children is the best way for yourself to have a stake in the future, an investment in the future. And I think that was a nice thought. Those are things that I'm thinking about. What things makes me want to have an investment in the future? And that's why I'm thinking about how to counterbalance this, horrible information that I know about climate change and tipping points and whatnot. And I'm trying to figure out how to talk about this stuff in mind with this idea that I do want to have an investment in the future.
Okay, thank you very much for coming into this experiment of just discussing. We started with the urgency and then we brought our all ideas about climate emergency and climate solutions and ways to organize. And I think the listeners can just take what rings a bell for them. And hopefully this was a nice setup. And I will like to close with a quote from an article written by Carolina Vozian. The article is called "For Peace, for Radical Ethics of Nonviolence." And we will put it into the description link. It's in Romanian, but I'm sure people that are interested can translate it. We know and we don't know. Shrouded in the illusion of unreality, we don't know. If we choose to open our eyes, we know, and helplessness overwhelms us. We know and we don't know the mechanism of power. We know and we don't know the defense mechanism of our brain when tragedy becomes too much. How can we know and bear the pain without being overwhelmed? What is a global policy in which popular power is so limited? What would militantism for peace look like if it aimed to break the veil of helplessness? We know and we don't know. We will close here. Thank you very much.
If you like our work, or at least think it's useful, help us spread the word by smashing that like button, like it's the face of a fossil fuel executive or something. That's cringe, but please subscribe anyway.